والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the chapter of al-Ghusl from the book of al-Murbi. And we stopped after mentioning the mujibat of al-Ghusl. What makes the Ghusl obligatory are 6 things. We talked about khuruju al-mani, and I would read the matn of Zad al-Mustaqni, where we covered already, inshallah. So if you look at page 147, that's what we're following now, inshallah, if you're online. So we have Bab al-Ghusl, وموجبه خروج المني دفقا بلذة لا بدونهما من غير نائم وإن انتقل ولم يخرج اغتسل له فإن خرج بعده لم يعده وتغييب حشفة أصلية في فرج أصلي قبلا كان أو دبرا ولو من بهيمة أو ميت وإسلام كافر. And this is where we stopped, I believe. I'm not sure if did we say the next one, the 5th one? No. This is at the 5th one, right? So وموت, which is the 4th one, وموت, the maut, the death. So now the 5th one, which is, as he says in page 150, وحيض. I would read that first, because this is what we need to memorize, inshallah. So وحيض ونفاس لا ولادة عارية عن دم ومن لزمه الغسل حرم عليه قراءة القرآن ويعبر المسجد لحاجة ولا يلبث فيه بغير وضوء ومن غسل ميتا أو أفاق من جنون أو إغماء بلا حلم سن له الغسل. Then after that he talks about the صفة, how to make the perfect or the complete ghusl. So going back again, page 150, where he says and since al-Rawd, the sharh is sharh masjid, that means it's mixed with the matn of Zad al-Mustaqni, so it's not like separated. So that's why, assuming that we're having the book and we're following, inshallah ta'ala, so when we read it, you see the difference between both. So he says والخامس, so the 5th one, حيض والسادس نفاس. So the 5th mujib that makes the ghusl mandatory is al-hayd, which is the monthly menses for women, ونفاس, and then nifas is the afterbirth bleeding. There's a chapter for that. So the ahkam of al-hayd and nifas will be discussed later, but here in the subject of what necessitates the ghusl. He says, وَلَا خِلَافَ فِي وُجُوبِ الْغُسْلِ بِهِمَا. There's no khilaf, there's no differences in wujub, in the obligation of al-ghusl with these two, meaning al-hayd wal-nifas. قاله في المغني الإمام ابن قدامة رحمه الله. So there's no khilaf in this, of course. This is an obvious thing. But then the specific term mentioned afterwards, he says فَيَجِبُ بِالْخُرُوجِ وَالْإِنْقِطَاعُ شَرْطٌ. فيجب بالخروج والانقطاع شرط. يجب. What's يجب? Refers to al-ghusl. Al-ghusl becomes wajib when, for in the case of al-hayd wal-nifas, بالخروج. Al-khuruj is when something exits, when something comes out. So when the blood of the menses, once it comes out, the ghusl is wajib. Right? This is what is meant. The wujub becomes present when the blood comes out. Of course, if the blood comes out, that means the woman is not to take shower to make salah. She's forbidden from making salah. So what is the meaning of the ghusl becomes wajib? Becomes wajib once the blood comes out. وَالْإِنْقِطَاعُ شَرْطٌ. Al-inqita' is the severing of the blood. The stop of the blood is shart, is a condition for the ghusl to be established, because she won't make the ghusl till after the blood is cut off. That means there's no blood anymore. And this is very clear, because what makes the ghusl wajib is the blood of the menses or the blood of the nifas. That would make them wajib. And for example, if a woman, she was in her menses, and she, for example, she died as a shaheed, right? الشهيد لا يغسل, correct? شهيد المعركة, the shaheed in the battlefield, he is not to made ghusl for. But the ulama, they mention, if she, just imagine for the sake of the mas'ala, for the sake of understanding the point here, that if she died in the battlefield and she was in her menses, then the ghusl here is to be done or not. Right? Since the ghusl was for her when she was alive wajib, they say the ghusl is on her because she was in her menses. So this is kind of showing the some of the significance of why this is mentioned. So يجب بالخروج. So الحيض يجب بالخروج. Once the blood comes out, then the ghusl is wajib on her. But does she addressed, هل هي مخاطبة بالغسل الآن? Is she addressed to make the ghusl now? No. It's when the blood stops, then this is a condition for the ghusl to be initiated, is when there's no blood. And also there's other things, implications to it, as it's also going to be mentioned with being in the masjid, not being in the masjid, things like this. So then he says, so al-hayd wal-nufas makes the ghusl wajib, as there's no differences of opinions in that. لا ولادة عارية عن دم. So now we learned the way that the mutun and the words of the fuqaha, especially here, when he says لا, that means after mentioning the mas'ala, then give you an exception here. Not wilada. Wilada is birth. عارية عن دم. عارية عن. That means it does not have any blood. And the word عارية, it has many different meanings to it. It depends on the context of it. Whether it's sometimes عارية is when you give someone something to keep, to save for you. And of course the harf that comes after it gives you the meaning of what? عارية عن. العارية also, العري is when someone is naked or not wearing clothes. So not having. عارية عن, that means does not have blood. So if it's, imagine if it rarely happens that a woman would give birth and no nifas, no afterbirth blood. So what is the ruling for this woman? Is no blood came out. So as a result of that ruling, the ghusl is what? Is not wajib. Because the wujub was with khuruj al-dam. So since the dam did not come out, that means there's no ghusl. لا ولادة عارية عن دم. If she gave birth and there was no blood. So he says here in the sharh, فلا غسل بها, there's no ghusl in this case. والولد طاهر, and the child is طاهر, is pure. And of course the human being is always pure. So that means she makes her salah, everything is fine because there's no blood. So there's no blood after she gave birth. So, and the same thing with being, as far as the ahkam is concerned, with her husband and everything, because there's no blood. So it's about the blood, it's not about the birth. So that's to understand the issue of al-hayd wal-nufas, لا ولادة عارية عن دم. And then he says the next one, وَمَنْ لَزِمَهُ الْغُسْلُ. Now the things that are forbidden for someone if he has to make ghusl, because ghusl now is mandatory upon him. So what are the things that are forbidden? So يقول وَمَنْ لَزِمَهُ الْغُسْلُ, he says لِشَيْءٍ مِمَّا تَقَدَّمْ, for anything of what has been mentioned before. The things that necessitated the ghusl, the hayd, the janaba, and all of these things. So someone now, it's obligatory for him to make ghusl because he's in state of janaba, for example, so he's not in state of tahara. What's forbidden for him? حرم عليه, حرم, it's forbidden for him. الصلاة والطواف ومس المصحف. الصلاة is forbidden. الطواف is forbidden around the Kaaba. مس المصحف, touching the mushaf, is forbidden. And then when you look at these things, this is the same thing with the wudu. If someone doesn't have wudu, then he cannot make salah, he cannot make tawaf, he cannot touch the mushaf. So that means what's حرم عليه here is because of what? Because of نواقض الوضوء? Yes. It's because of the نواقض of الوضوء. So الصلاة والطواف ومس المصحف. But here now in the Zad it says وقراءة القرآن. This is now special for الجنابة or what necessitates غسل. So if you read زاد المستقنع ومن لزمه الغسل حرم عليه قراءة القرآن. So if a person is not in wudu, he can read Quran, but he cannot touch the mushaf. But if he has to make ghusl, then يحرم عليه قراءة القرآن, to recite even the Quran. Reciting the Quran is not permissible for someone that is in state of janaba. He has to make ghusl, قراءة القرآن. Then he says in the sharh, what is the meaning or some details with it. أي قراءة آية فصاعدا. Which أي means that means it means reciting one ayah or more. صاعدا الصعود, talked in معارج القبول, الصعود is to ascend, to go up higher. So one verse or more. So if a person recites, as he's going to mention, half of a verse, he's not reciting Quran. So it's okay to recite half a verse, but as it's going to be mentioned, as long as it's not a long verse. So if he mentioned a verse or more, that's reciting Quran. It's not permissible for someone in state of janaba, for example, or someone that requires for him to have ghusl. وله قول, the next page, وله قول ما وافق قرآنا إن لم يقصده. Now the different situations here. وله for him is, that means it's permissible for him, قول, to say, speech, ما وافق قرآنا, what happened to be Quran. وافق قرآنا, that it happened وفاقا, it happened that he was saying something and it's like the Quran. إن لم يقصده, if he did not have the intentions that he's reciting Quran. Someone says, for example, إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. It's in the Quran, but he's not saying this with the intention of reciting Quran. Or ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا. He's making dua. If he does not have the intention of reciting Quran, it's permissible for him if he has to make ghusl, and he said this. This is وله قول ما وافق قرآنا, but with the condition إن لم يقصده, if he does not intend it and his maqsid is not to recite Quran. Like what? كالبسملة. Like basmala, saying Bismillah. Walhamdallah. Alhamdallah is to say Alhamdulillah. ونحوهما الحوقلة لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. التهليل, saying لا إله إلا الله, and so on. كالذكر, and he would say this as dhikr. He's not saying it to recite Quran or part of a Quran, because al-basmala is one verse of the Quran, as mentioned in Surah Al-Fatiha, and a part of a verse in Surah Al-Naml. But here, as long as he's not saying it as Quran, كالذكر, like the dhikr. وله تهجي. وله, so وله means what? It's for him, that means it's permissible. تهجي, حروف الهجاء, the letters of al-hija. So tahajji is the verb of saying the letters of a word. So when I say tahajja kada, the word tahajji, make the tahajji of it, you'd say ta, ha, jim, ya, ha. So tahajji, that means a person is saying the letters of the word. So he's a verse of the Quran, like for example, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. He says here, according to this, it's permissible to say قاف لام هاء واو ألف لام لام هاء ألف حاء دال. He's not reciting Quran, he's just saying the letters of the verse. وله تهجي. But all of these things, as long as there's no hila, right? It's not a hila, it's not a trick to read Quran. He needs to make tahajji of the ayat, that's fine, for a reason or whatever. والتفكر فيه, part of وله, that means it's valid for him, it's good for him, it's okay for him to reflect, to think about verses in the Quran without reciting. So a verse of he's thinking about a verse of the Quran, reflecting upon it, all of that is okay, there's nothing wrong with that. وتحريك شفتيه به ما لم يبين الحروف. Also what's permissible is تحريك شفتيه, to move his lips, as long as ما لم يبين الحروف, as long as he did not make clear the letters. So if the letters are made clear, that means he's reciting. That's what constitutes recitation. When someone يقرأ القرآن versus looking at the mushaf. So a junub, right? A junub that has to take a shower, he can look at the mushaf. He's not touching the mushaf. The mushaf is open in front of him on a screen, right? And he's looking at the verses or looking at an open mushaf, and he's not reciting. Like this is permissible. This is something permissible. If he moves his lips without al-huruf being clear, so to himself, like this, mumbling, but without voice, without vocal voices, and the letters are not being recited, because with every letter, as we know, the reward is 10 rewards. That means this is what makes it or constitutes the recitation. So when someone just open the mushaf and read with his eyes, he's not getting the rewards of recitation. Unless the letters are pronounced. The person is saying the letters. So ما لم يبين الحروف, because all of these things is to make it clear what does it mean to قراءة Quran. To exclude the things that does not come under recitation of the Quran. So تحريك شفتيه به ما لم يبين حروفه. So التهجي is not قراءة. التفكر is not قراءة. Right? تحريك الشفتين ليس بقراءة. Moving the lips is not قراءة by itself. Till the letters are made clear, then it's قراءة. Also وقراءة بعض آية ما لم تطل. Reciting بعض آية. A part of a verse. This is permissible, but he's not reciting Quran. He just recited part of a verse. ما لم تطل, as long as it's not تطل, that refers to the ayah. From طول, that means as long as it's not too long. So what's the longest ayah of the Quran? For example, ayatul dayn. So if someone recites half of it, no, you're reciting Quran too much, because it's like as if you're reciting many verses. So this is, but if it's a part of an ayah, وقراءة بعض آية ما لم تطل, that's okay. And this is something that is يعني as even طيب قراءة بعض وقراءة بعض آية ما لم تطل ولا يمنع من قراءته متنجس الفم. ولا يمنع, he is not to be prevented, to be stopped from his recitation of the Quran. This is something else. متنجس الفم. Someone, his mouth has najasa in it. If someone's mouth has najasa in it, is he prevented? Is he to be told it's haram for you to recite Quran? No, لا يمنع. How would someone have متنجس الفم? الدم, for example, it's najis, we're not going into the اختيارات and fatwa of the ulama and thing. If we assume that الدم is najis, for example, the blood, and someone's mouth has blood, not a drop or something, he's wounded or something and he's bleeding, right? Whatever, or anything najasa. The najasa in the mouth, this is the mas'ala. The examples that can be different. So if the mouth is najis, that does not prevent the person from reciting the Quran. It's not something that is haram for the person to recite the Quran if he is متنجس الفم. ولا يمنع من قراءته متنجس الفم. As some said that it's makruh, it's disliked out of respect of the Quran. The respect, this is something else. That's why we have to differentiate between what is forbidden versus when it comes to respect of the Quran. You don't have to have an evidence for every matter of respect of the Quran. You don't have to have an evidence for it. You have to make ta'zeem of the Quran, so to stay away from anything that would cause the person to have any disrespect. And plus the person should be in a perfect state. So this is, and then next, وَيُمْنَعُ الْكَافِرُ مِنْ قِرَاءَتِهِ. The kafir, yumna. It's not permissible for the kafir and to stop the kafir from reciting Quran. If the junub is prevented, then the kafir maybe awla, right? If the junub is not permissible for him to recite the Quran, so the kafir is even worse than that. وَيُمْنَعُ الْكَافِرُ مِنْ قِرَاءَتِهِ. This is the Quran. But if he recites tarjama, translation, this is no problem. وَلَوْ رُجِيَ Islam. Even if رُجِيَ in the passive tense, from al-raja, even if they hope for his Islam. If he recites the Quran, maybe this can be more likely that he becomes a Muslim. No. This is the Quran in the Arabic. right? If you cannot force him, if he does recite, I don't know, what are you going to do? But the kafir is, don't say to a kafir, read the Quran. Here's the Quran. Read it in Arabic and raise your voice and make us hear your beautiful voice in the Quran. Maybe this will soften his heart. No. If the junub is not supposed to recite the Quran, the same thing for the kafir. But the translation or the tafsir or anything like this, it's okay. This is according to what's mentioned in the madhab. Then he says, so ومن لزمه الغسل لشيء مما تقدم حرم عليه الصلاة والطواف ومس المصحف وقراءة القرآن أي قراءة آية فصاعدة وله قول ما وافق قرآنا إن لم يقصده كالبسملة والحمدلة ونحوهما كالذكر وله تهجي والتفكر فيه وتحريك شفتيه به ما لم يبين الحروف وقراءة بعض آية ما لم تطل ولا يمنع من قراءته متنجس الفم ويمنع الكافر من قراءته ولو رجي إسلامه. We'll take the next we'll stop inshallah ta'ala right before وصفة الغسل الكامل. So now the next part here is which with regards to اللبث في المسجد والمكث في المسجد, staying in the masjid, the rulings with the junub with the masjid. ويعبر المسجد. يعبر المسجد. العبور is to cross, is to go from one place to the other. So ويعبر, the present tense, that means this is all with the rules of the one that الغسل واجب في حقه, he has to take a shower, he has to make ghusl. It's permissible for him to cross, to walk into a masjid, to from one door to the other. يعبر المسجد أي يدخله. So that means to enter the masjid. So entering the masjid for the junub is okay, it's permissible. لقوله تعالى ولا جنبا إلا عابر سبيل, because the ayah says ولا جنبا, no junub is permissible for him إلا عابر سبيل, unless wayfarer passing by. عابر, so ويعبر أي طريق, أي path. لحاجة, so ويعبر المسجد لحاجة, for a need. If he has a need, he needs to cross the masjid. The masjid, for example, is in a block where if he does not, if he does not enter, there's two doors. One door from one street and the other door in the other street. For him to walk outside, this can take him a long time. And he needs to go quickly to where he's going to. And if he go cross the masjid, then it becomes easier for him. And he's junub, right? Is it permissible for him? Yes. He has a need, so he walk in the masjid to the other side. وغيرها, and other than the haja, whether it's haja or not haja, على الصحيح in the madhab, that this is permissible for someone to cross the masjid, to pass, to enter the masjid, to walk. We're not talking about staying in the masjid yet. This is junub, this is in state of janaba or has to take a shower. He's just crossing the masjid. كما مشى عليه في الإقناع من الحجاوي, this is how he took in الإقناع. وكونه طريقا قصيرا حاجة, and for the fact that he's making the other than the haja. So there's the haja, the need, versus there's no need. So this is what he says according to as-sahih from the madhab, whether it's haja or not. Because also the masjid is going to be a short distance anyway. So the fact that it's a طريقا قصيرا وكونه طريقا قصيرا حاجة, it's a need. وكره أحمد اتخاذه طريقا. Imam Ahmad رحمه الله كره, he disliked for the masjid to be taken as a path. That's different here. There's two things. Someone crossing the masjid because he wants to walk through it, versus the masjid becomes their path. So it becomes the norm that people just take in the masjid as a path of going back and forth. This is where he disliked, and this is out of the respect of the masjid. So this is according to what the madhab is. There are other opinions where it's forbidden if the masjid is taken as a path. And of course, if people then become in a state of disrespecting the masjid, then this is something that, of course, they should stop from doing so. So, and the fact that the tariq قصير, right? So وكونه طريقا قصيرا حاجة. How's the طريق القصير حاجة? That means if the masjid is huge masjid, right? If you go from one place, one end to it, to the end of it, you miss the point. It's like, for example, you go to the Kaaba, the masjid, you want to go from one gate to go out from another gate. You're just passing by. Makes it easier for you because the hotel and things like this, like something like this. It's okay. But if it's huge and it doesn't make a difference, then it's better to avoid this. But even though, again, it's whether it's to haja or without a haja, it's permissible. We're talking here about who? Not the normal person, the one that is in janaba, he did not remove himself from that state. That means ghusl is mandatory upon him. ومصلى العيد مسجد لا مصلى الجنائز. مصلى العيد, the place designated for Salatul Eid. They used to have a place different. Musalla al-Eid, this is outside of the city, which is known to be Musalla al-Eid. So this is where, as he said, it's masjid. That means the rules of the masjid applies. Why? Because the women, as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he said, اعتزلنا المصلى. Stay away from the musalla. So that means the rule of the masjid applies there. So someone that has to take a shower is not to be in the Musalla al-Eid, because he's in janaba, because the same ruling applies of the masjid. لا مصلى الجنائز, not the musalla, the place of the salatul janaza. They used to also have a special place for salatul janaza outside of the masjid. So the place of salatul janaza, it's okay if he's there instead of janaba. Why? Because the salatul janaza is not a full salah with sujood and ruku', so it does not apply the rules of the masjid there. No. Then he says, ولا the متن ولا يلبث فيه بغير وضوء, which means ولا يجوز أن يلبث فيه. You see here, if you look at the book, if you read the only Zad, when you're memorizing the Zad, you would memorize it how? Say ولا يلبث فيه, right? ولا يلبث. But because the sharh ولا يجوز أن يلبث, right? So because it's after an, so it's mansub. So don't be confused with that if you're memorizing. And that's why it's best if you're memorizing, memorize it from a different, just the matn itself on its own, not the matn with the mixing with the rawd. Otherwise you might miss with the i'rab here. So because it's all upon one thing. ولا يجوز أن يلبث فيه, it's not permissible أن يلبث. اللبث is to stay in a place with the tha here. ولبثوا في كهفهم 300 سنين وازدادوا تسعة. They stayed in there. So it is not permissible أن يلبث فيه. Who's the one that يلبث فيه? Talking about the one that has to take غسل. He says أي في المسجد من عليه غسل. It's not permissible to stay in the masjid, the one that has غسل upon him. He has to make غسل. بغير وضوء, without making wudu. That means if he makes wudu, it's okay to stay in the masjid. فإن توضأ جاز له اللبث فيه. If he makes wudu, can he make salah if he makes wudu? The answer is no. So what does the wudu does? Just تخفيف الجنابة. It makes the janaba lesser the intensity of the janaba. فإن توضأ جاز له, what's permissible for him in this case? Only to stay in the masjid. This is من مفردات المذهب. The jumhur of Ahl Ilm, it's not permissible for him. This is only specific for Madhab Ahmad, that if he makes wudu, because there's some statements from the Sahaba, Zayd ibn Aslam and others, where they would say that the man at the time of the Prophet والسلام, that he would sit in the masjid when people are sitting, معهم وهو جنوب. He would sit with them while he's in state of janaba, but with the fact that they would make wudu. So they would consider that as valid. So, and of course, no one would choose to do this, but in situations with the scarcity of water or someone, this is needed actually when people are in i'tikaf. When someone is in i'tikaf and he wake up and he has to take a shower, he has to make ghusl, and the shower is busy, and there's line, and we should kick him out of the masjid. Then if he's going to wait in the masjid, make wudu. Then if he makes wudu, then he can sit in the masjid till his turn comes to make the ghusl. ولا يجوز أن يلبث فيه أي في المسجد من عليه غسل بغير وضوء, without wudu. فإن توضأ جاز له اللبث فيه. Only to stay in the masjid with wudu. ويمنع منه مجنون وسكران ومن عليه نجاسة تتعدى. So ويمنع منه, يمنع is to be prevented, ممنوع, it's forbidden. منه, from the masjid. What? مجنون, insane, someone is insane. وسكران, someone intoxicated. ومن عليه نجاسة تتعدى, and whoever has najasa on him, تتعدى, get extended so that it would pollute the masjid. So if he has a najasa in himself but it's hidden, then it's okay. But if it's najasa is on his body, for example, and if he walks into the masjid, the najasa will make the masjid najis and be purifies parts of the masjid, then of course he's to be prevented from coming into the masjid till he clean himself. And al-majnoon, the insane one and the sakran and intoxicated, they're of course they're not responsible for their actions. So what's the prevention here is for what other out of the fear that they might do bad things in the masjid. Majnoon, someone is insane. Unless is it permissible if a majnoon comes? It depends on the level of al-junoon, the level of insanity. I'm saying this because some might ask the practical. Now we're studying the book, we're studying the masail. But if someone has a son, for example, that is insane, but he's controlled and he's with his father, for example, or something like this, then he's not to be said, no, you cannot bring him in. Unless, he knows that he's going to cause harm in the masjid. The same thing, someone sakran. If someone is intoxicated, but there's a benefit of bringing him in the masjid to repent to Allah or something, but in general, he is to be prevented because of all of that is related to the impurities. Since the impurities are mentioned, because they might spread impurities in the masjid, and that's something that is harmful. He says, وَيُبَاحُ بِهِ وُضُوءٌ وَغُسْلٌ وَيُبَاحُ بِهِ. Now this is some of the rulings of the masjid. يُبَاحُ بِهِ, that means it's permissible in the masjid. وُضُوءٌ وَغُسْلٌ, to make wudu in the masjid, to make ghusl in the masjid. It's permissible, but with the condition, إِلَّمْ يُؤْذِ بِهِمَا. إِلَّمْ يُؤْذِ, if he does not harm, بِهِمَا. بِهِمَا, the muthanna here, the damir refers to who? The two things, which is al-wudu wal-ghusl. If the wudu and the ghusl is not harmful in the masjid, it does not cause harm in the masjid, then it's okay to be done in the masjid. And of course, if people, if it's not, if a person makes wudu in our masjid like this in the masjid, of course, this is something that's gonna cause harm to the masjid, on the carpet, for example. Can someone do this or makes a smell, things like this. ويباح به وضوء وغسل إن لم يؤذي بهما. وإذا كان الماء في المسجد. Now this is some detailed or some of the masail here with regards to the junub, or the one that has to take a shower, and when is it to make tayammum or not in his case. So if we follow here, and you can make your own way of studying it, whether it's a tree or something, they call it تشجير هذا, to figure out the masail يعني. Let's read it one by one. وإذا كان الماء في المسجد, if the water is in the masjid, right? جاز دخوله. As you see, the books of al-fiqh, they confuse sometimes with the dama'ir refers to who. You have to be very focused who's the damir is referring to. We're still talking about the one that has to take a shower. So وإذا كان الماء في المسجد, if the water is in the masjid and this person has to take a shower, right? So the water is in the masjid. جاز, it's permissible. دخوله, the junub, for example, the one that has to take a shower. It's permissible for him to enter بلا تيمم, without tayammum, without making tayammum. And this is, of course, we're not talking about someone made wudu. If he made wudu, of course, it's permissible and he can stay. But this is someone that is junub and he did not make wudu and the water is in the masjid. What should he do? Permissible for him to go to the masjid without tayammum, and he's going to make ghusl in the masjid. Right? So in our case, or many of the masajid, someone that is junub and he's coming to the masjid to make ghusl in the masjid. He's going to open the door and enter the masjid. It's permissible. Does he have to make tayammum? No, because he's going to take a shower in the masjid. Right? So this is clear. وَإِنْ أَرَادَ اللُّبْثَ فِيهِ لِلِاغْتِسَالِ. If he wants to stay, al-lubth is to stay now in the masjid, not just walking in the masjid to go to take a shower. إِنْ أَرَادَ اللُّبْثَ فِيهِ, but he wants to stay there to make اغتسال. If he makes wudu, what is the ruling here? That's fine, stay. But there's no water. He did not make wudu. وَإِنْ أَرَادَ اللُّبْثَ فِيهِ لِلِاغْتِسَالِ تَيَمَّمْ. Then in that case, to make tayammum. He's not coming to stay in the masjid for the sake of staying in the masjid. He's coming to make ightisal, ghusl in the masjid, and there's no wudu, no water to make wudu. and he's waiting for his turn. Then to make tayammum before he stays till he make the ightisal, because there's no means to make wudu. Clear? The third case here, وإن تعذر الماء واحتاج للبث. If the water is تعذر, there's no water. He cannot find any water. واحتاج للبث. Yes, واحتاج للبث. He is in need of staying. He needs to stay. And there's no water. If there's water, he would make wudu. Right? And if he needs to stay to make ightisal, he would make tayammum. But if there's no water and he needs to stay, jaza bila tayammum. It's permissible without even making tayammum, because he needs to stay. So they make differentiation here between the haja here, he needs to stay, so that means it's permissible in this case without even making tayammum. And there's evidences to this with Wafd Abd al-Qais and others. So this is just to make it clear. So there's differences between making wudu to stay in the masjid. This is obvious. If there's no water to make wudu and he's in the masjid to make ghusl, then make tayammum till if he wants to stay. If there's no water to make wudu or to make ghusl, right, and he needs to stay, then it's permissible without tayammum. Clear? The last part here, inshallah, he says, وَمَنْ غَسَّلَ مَيْتًا أو مَيِّتًا, whoever washes a dead. So now the ruling of those who washes the dead. مسلما كان أو كافرا, whether this dead is Muslim or a kafir. سُنَّ له الغسل. Sunnah, that means it's recommended for him, not obligatory for him to make ghusl. لأمر أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه بذلك رواه أحمد وغيره. So if whoever washes a dead, whether it's a Muslim or a kafir, سنة له الغسل لأمر أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه بذلك رواه أحمد وغيره. And من غسل ميتا فليغتسل. And the ulama, talked about the hadith, and some of it, some had authenticated it, but here as recommended, not as an obligatory thing. So رواه أحمد وغيره. So this is only recommended. What's obligatory is to make wudu. If he bashara al-ghusl, if he's actually moving the deceased, putting the water like this. So, but ghusl, no, it's only recommended. أو أفاق من جنون. So this is أغسال مستحبة, this is recommended ghusl. أو أفاق من جنون, someone that got awakened from insanity. He was insane, and then he back to his senses. It's recommended only, not obligatory for him to make ghusl, only recommended. أو إغماء بلا حلم. أو إغماء, fainted, and then he gained consciousness. It's only recommended to make wudu, but with the condition بلا حلم. Al-hulum is أي إنزال. If he had semen came out, whether he is in state of junoon, insanity, or إغماء, or fainted, or even slept, of course, then the ghusl becomes obligatory upon him. So that's why he says بلا حلم. So therefore it means if someone washes a dead or was insane and he gained consciousness, he fainted and he gained consciousness without, of course, what necessitates the ghusl by semen come out, then ghusl is only recommended. If something came out that makes the ghusl wajib, then he has to make the ghusl which is wajib for him in this case. بلا حلم أي إنزال. سنة له الغسل. The ghusl for him is recommended. He says لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم اغتسل من الإغماء, and the hadith is متفق عليه, because the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام اغتسل من الإغماء. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام made ghusl from fainting, and he says متفق عليه, and this is when the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام told him to put water for him in the mikhdab, and he fainted, and they poured water on the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. So this is even some, like Ibn al-Mundhir, he mentioned the ijma' that this is not mandatory. The Prophet ﷺ did not do it as an act of mandatory. So this is from al-ighma'. وَالْجُنُونُ فِي مَعْنَى. Al-junun is in the same meaning of al-ighma', قياساً على al-ighma'. A person lost his mind. and then he gained it, then it has the same ruling. بل أولى, but then he said, but rather it's even more than upon him that it's recommended to make ghusl. We're not yet in the mustahabbat, that's why he says وتأتي بقية الأغسال المستحبة في أبواب ما تستحب له. It will be mentioned in the chapter later inshallah. Then he says ويتيمم للكل ولما يسن له وضوء لعذر. ويتيمم الكل. Here it says that if it's a ghusl mustahab, recommended ghusl. That means if a person doesn't do it, he's not to be blamed. There's no sin. But it's also recommended if he doesn't have water to make tayammum for it. For that ghusl that is mustahab. The tayammum is for the mustahab. وَلِمَا يُسَنُّ لَهُ وُضُوءٌ لِعُذْرٍ. And also, you want to make wudu for something that the wudu is sunnah for, not obligatory for. And there's no water. To make tayammum if there's no water. لِعُذْرٍ, for an excuse. Like someone wants to, it's recommended to be in state of wudu to recite the Quran. Recommended, it's not obligatory. So you want to recite the Quran while in state of wudu and there's no water. Make tayammum. And this is so this is with the tayammum with what's recommended. And the recommended ghusl will come later inshallah ta'ala. So we'll stop here and we continue inshallah ta'ala next time. I would read it one more time and follow inshallah what we covered and to make sure that every word is clear inshallah. And again, as we know that we're not asking questions about the matters that are not in the matn and the sharh to understand it, and what is the fatwa of the ulama, and what's اختيارات بعض المشايخ, and this is different context inshallah. But to make sure that this is clear of what's mentioned here. So I read it one time inshallah. So follow from page 150. والخامس حيض والسادس نفاس ولا خلاف في وجوب الغسل بهما قاله في المغني فيجب بالخروج والانقطاع شرط لا ولادة عارية عن دم فلا غسل بها والولد طاهر ومن لزمه الغسل لشيء مما تقدم حرم عليه الصلاة والطواف ومس المصحف وقراءة القرآن أي قراءة آية فصاعدة وله قول ما وافق قرآنا إن لم يقصده كالبسملة والحمدلة ونحوهما كالذكر وله تهجيه والتفكر فيه وتحريك شفتيه به ما لم يبين الحروف وقراءة بعض آية ما لم تطل ولا يمنع من قراءته متنجس الفم ولا ويمنع الكافر من قراءته ولو رجي إسلامه ويعبر المسجد أي يدخله لقوله تعالى ولا جنبا إلا عابري سبيل أي طريق لحاجة وغيرها على الصحيح كما مشى عليه في الإقناع وكونه طريقا قصيرا حاجة وكره أحمد اتخاذه طريقا ومصلى العيد مسجد لا مصلى الجنائز ولا يجوز أن يلبث فيه أي في المسجد من عليه غسل بغير وضوء فإن توضأ جاز له اللبث فيه ويمنع منه مجنون وسكران ومن عليه نجاسة تتعدى ويباح به وضوء وغسل إن لم يؤذي بهما وإذا كان الماء في المسجد جاز دخوله بلا تيمم وإن أراد اللبث فيه للاغتسال تيمم وإن تعذر الماء واحتاج لللبث جاز بلا تيمم ومن غسل ميتا مسلما أو كافرا سن له الغسل لأمر أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه بذلك رواه أحمد وغيره أو أفاق من جنون أو إغماء بلا حلم أي إنزال سن له الغسل لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم اغتسل من الإغماء متفق عليه والجنون في معناه بل أولى وتأتي بقية الأغسال المستحبة في أبواب ما تستحب له ويتيمم للكل ولما يسن له وضوء لعذر. And الزاد very brief is وحيض ونفاس لا ولادة عارية عن دم ومن لزمه الغسل حرم عليه قراءة القرآن ويعبر المسجد لحاجة ولا يلبث فيه بغير وضوء ومن غسل ميتا أو أفاق من جنون أو إغماء بلا حلم سن له الغسل. And that's the end of it إن شاء الله. طيب the attendance code is غسل and or جنابة. وخير، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك، أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.